Why hello there, dear viewer. Today, we are going to go over Lindsay Ellis's alien romance novel that aided in ending her entire online career after she spent over a decade trying to write it. Is it really so bad that she would quit her million-sub YouTube channel because of it? Part of me says yes, but that's because before this reading, I only got up to chapter 9. To give a bit of backstory, Lindsay was formerly a member of Channel Awesome as the Nostalgia Chick, before she tried to start her own website called Chaz Apocalypse, and had that completely fail. In both of these places, she tried to be a reviewer and covered subjects ranging from Disney movies to chick flicks to movies like Independence Day. So, it's not like the subject of aliens and female protagonists is something alien to her. I assume she knows what she's talking about, since she was able to review movies about aliens and even did a review series on Transformers movies about how Marxist and feminist they were. She wouldn't fail in writing these books after such an impressive portfolio, would she? Let's find out. Oh, and before I start with the analysis, I would like for people to know that I am actually working on a massive overview of aliens in fiction, which will be another series I'm going to work on as I try to cover pretty much every monster trope out there. Sounds like a lot, but I have my way of simplifying it through emanation. Expect that to start trickling out in a month or so. With that said, let's get on with the review of Axiom End. To start, we are going to dissect the holy trinity of primary marketing: the title, the cover, and the blurb. From what I've been told by Lindsay, this is meant to be a sci-fi book, and it seems everyone else thought the same thing on Goodreads. But I swear people, including Lindsay, keep calling this a romance story. From what I've read, this story is actually just a political thriller that doesn't want to call itself a political thriller. Yes, again. First we had Daniel Green calling his political thriller a dark fantasy story, and now we have this political thriller being called a sci-fi romance. I understand it can be both. I'm not saying this is not sci-fi. What I'm saying is that if you're going to spend over half the time of your novel writing a political thriller, and then you try to sell this as a sci-fi romance, and you don't really mention the political thriller part, then you're pretty much lying to the audience, and it's obvious this is done to hide the agenda within. Maybe these YouTube progressives don't understand what a political thriller is because they think everything is political, but I don't know why they would look at appropriate labeling as a bad thing. Maybe appropriate labeling is seen as taboo by these nutjobs, I don't know. So the title, Axiom End. What does it mean? Well, an axiom is a fancy word college kids use to say that there is a statement that is self-evident. Just saying a statement causes a statement to be true. Something like, I think, therefore I am, is treated like an axiom by people who are Cartesian, or agree with the Cartesian statement. It's treated as true and is no longer questioned because it's the very beginning of a logical chain that follows it. The end of an axiom is where the logical chain can no longer reach. It has to be questioned because anything after the end of an axiom is where the person would be begging the question, which is why we end up questioning it if we are not going to blindly follow it. Either that, or it can mean logic has ended, meaning we can no longer believe anything, and now everything is going to be based on emotion or feeling. I like to look at a title like this and translate it to postmodernism engage! Because at this point it's what Lindsay is trying to sell. No longer should we put logic into anything because Lindsay is talking. So now we have to shut off our brain and blindly accept what she says, because logic is too hard for her and it's oppressing her. But as a side note, further reading into the story reveals the title is in relation to an axiom that the aliens have made about intelligent life, and their encounter with humans is what ends their axiom and pretty much becomes the main conflict of the book, due to it threatening humanity. This type of title is a make or break for a sci-fi story. It works if the story is like a Philip K. Dick type of postmodernism, something that's new wave sci-fi or has an entire narrative as a philosophical allegory. Sadly, the theme of this story revolves around what makes us human, and covers a bit into how language works. so a title like this could have worked if she was a bit more focused on her theme. I'll give it a pass for now, until something later changes my mind. Because so far, it does fit with her political thriller narrative, but doesn't quite fit with the sci-fi elements. The cover is something I would actually praise for this type of story. The Earth is a giant ink blot, and the part of Earth that we see is in the Americas. Thankfully, Lindsay made her main character a Latinx, living in California, so that can have South or Central America being involved with the United States political nonsense. This cover works, and I am glad a professional book cover person works for St. Martin Press. The ink blot represents how the Earth is a bit amorphous and can psychologically change depending on perspective, while showing the Americas tells the reader exactly where the story will focus its attention on. We get the setting, we get the initial tone, and we get a bit of sci-fi feel to it, by having space shown in the background in the shape of a fingerprint behind it, showing that Earth is this amorphous thing that's biologically unique because of a human element. Anyone who would want to read a new wave sci-fi kind of story would be turned on by this cover, because it really is a callback to the 70s era, where we had stuff about crazy sci-fi drugs and cyberpunk and techno-noir. The orange color being affiliated with the 70s is another dead giveaway of the influence, but this orange color can also technically relate to the Nickelodeon era, the late 90s and early 2000s, or when kids would be watching cartoons and they had commercials with green slime being thrown at people. I'm going to mention something about the cover that many people will miss. The lunar moon is shown to have its crescent. This is a symbol for womanhood. This is a symbol that relates to Wicca, the triple goddess, and in this specific moon, it represents the maiden, because it's in the crescent waxing phase. This is a big thing that's online, especially in feminist circles, and especially on Tumblr, which Lindsay is not a stranger to. I have every reason to believe this was added intentionally. It shows that she is representing, and that we are going to be in for a wonderfully feminist good time. So, for this kind of cover, I can either expect a callback to the 70s new wave sci-fi, or possibly an homage to something relating to the Nickelodeon era in the US. Or I can expect it to be like the feminist LGBT garbage that all the leftists are writing these days.
Shots fired! Shots fired!
But before I give my opinion on how it works for the story, let's touch up on the blurb. Truth is a human right. It's fall 2007. A well-timed leak has revealed that the US government might have engaged in first contact. Cora Sabino is doing everything she can to avoid the whole mess, since the force driving the controversy is her whistleblower father. Even though Cora hasn't spoken to him in years, his celebrity has caught the attention of the press, the internet, the paparazzi, and the government. And with him in hiding, that attention is on her. She neither knows nor cares whether her father's leaks are a hoax, and wants nothing to do with him, until she learns just how deeply entrenched her family is in the cover-up, and that an extraterrestrial presence has been on Earth for decades. Realizing the extent to which both she and the public have been lied to, she sets out to gather as much information as she can, and finds that the best way for her to uncover the truth is not as a whistleblower, but as an intermediary. The alien presence has been completely uncommunicative until she convinces one of them that she can act as their interpreter, becoming the first and only human vessel of communication. Their otherworldly connection will change everything she thought she knew about being human, and could unleash a force more sinister than she ever imagined. Oh yeah, I can tell this is a romance by that blurb, and there's no way I'd be sarcastic about that. So, to give credit where credit is due, we actually have a nice themed sandwich of a blurb here. It begins with truth is a human right, and ends with their otherworldly connection will change everything she thought she knew about being a human. Which means the truth, and what it means to be human, and the presence of an otherworldly connection are all at play in this book's theme. It makes the book look philosophical, as if it's going to go over a lot of subjects, about transhumanism or human nature, and it makes it look like the alien is a major feature of the entire story. We're also told that the US government is going to be the antagonist in the story, so we can expect it to be a political thriller from the get-go. I don't really mind this kind of blurb. Sure, there's weird grammar and some of the sentences are worded poorly, but it tells you what is in there, and I can understand it. I don't believe we're going to be misled at all from this blurb, and it looks appealing if someone is into conspiracy theories, or an alien encounter similar to E.T. Boy, do I wish this played out like E.T., but sadly it's not E.T. The best I can say about this blurb is that it does its job, to bring in the people who like a very niche subject, and doesn't really try to bring in anyone else. This is not the gateway kind of book, and so far the only reason you'd read it is if you are really into alien conspiracy theories, and think those would be explored in the story, or if you know Lindsay and think her video essay ability translates into a novel form. Spoiler! It doesn't. I'm trying to think of how someone would be wandering down the aisle of Target and what would make them really want to pick this out at random, as if it caught the average sci-fi reader's eye. If it was me and I was going for 2007, while trying to sell it in 2019, I would have really tried to hit those Nickelodeon nostalgia notes, and I wouldn't have used the font she did. I would have done something more like that Slaughterhouse-5 font where it's handwritten with a Sharpie, or even the graphic novel version where it has that cartoon character floating in front of a bullseye. There's a difference between trying to sell something and trying to be symbolic for representation's sake. If I was her, I would have made it look more cute or hipster directed, instead of the way she did it. Because the number one thing to do is know your audience, and her audience would have enjoyed a hipster element and some cuteness. Especially since there's a woman's name on the cover. Maybe the reason she didn't get the sales her publisher wanted was because she failed to realize that the average reader at the frickin' Target isn't as much of a radical fourth-wave feminist as she is, so the average reader isn't going to add any numbers to her conversion rate, since they would just easily ignore this kind of cover and this kind of title in the way it's presented, especially with the kind of blurb it has. I like how the blurb tries to take itself seriously instead of being playful with the subject of conspiracy theories. What many leftist readers don't realize is that conspiracy theories like the ones in this book are a niche part of sci-fi, ironically enough, and we already went through the Dan Brown era of Illuminati novels. If you're going to mention anything about conspiracy theory, you really do have to go all out, like that show Inside Job, or have an established lore ethos like X-Files or Fringe. In other words, just mentioning conspiracy theories in the blurb fucked her in the ass because she wasn't willing to include more than one theory into her story. There was a part where she was in the forest and never once did mention Bigfoot. That should say everything. Disappointed! Another thing I want to point out is that Lindsay has pitched the story as if it's Stranger Things meets The Arrival, and I see absolutely none of it Stranger Things or The Arrival, other than the alien to Earthling communication concept from The Arrival, and every single terrible problem we experience in Season 3 of Stranger Things.
Written on the pages is the answer to a never-ending story.
My spine!
All in all, her primary marketing trinity isn't an entire failure, but it does force this book to direct itself to a small niche group. And this group isn't going to be happy with it anyway because of how the story tries to be Twilight, I believe past the halfway point. I am not sure I'll be able to go into every chapter as in-depth as I did with Breach of Peace, since there's just so much wrong in this book. I will try my best to keep it coherent, but from what I learned by reading ahead a bit, Lindsay doesn't put in any effort to making this novel coherent. So it seems I'm going to be putting more effort into this analysis of her novel than she put into her own damn novel. With that said, let's dive right into Chapter 1. Prologue. Oops. Looks like we can't because Lindsay wanted to put in a supposedly important document thing before anything in the story actually happens. This is sort of a neat trick to make the book feel more authentic or engaging, kind of like to make the conspiracy look more passable and get the reader into the mood. The one we get here is sort of like a prologue, but it doesn't try to establish anything in the story. All we are told with it is that there is this dude called Niles Ortega who sent an email to someone that we're not allowed to know, and this email was written a few months before the story begins. The email talks about how they have a subject, who is redacted, and how this thing called the Freedma Group has a language sample that is a 97-second recording. What's confusing is that Niles' organization is called the Broken Seal, so here we are given zero context as to what anything is, and there's even more information purposefully removed to tell us that something had a language sample and other people want it, but don't know how to get it. We're not even into the story and it's worthy of being put down. This is the worst thing to begin the story with due to how there is zero context, zero sense made, zero desire from the reader to care about who is who. And we don't even understand that this language sample is from an alien, so there's no reason to see any of this out of the ordinary. If this thing was placed in a later chapter, like after we met the alien, and if it mentioned the alien in the passage, then it could be effective to cause intrigue. With the way it was written, we are given zero reason to care, and we can easily skip it because, to simply explain the situation in a moment, the story would have to mention the very same thing that's in the email. We would have to be given the same information, and all this tells us is that there was an email sent. Whoop-de-doo! What does this all mean, Lindsay? Well, so far, it means that the story is postmodernist. No questions about it. She is going for the non-linear storytelling with intertextuality, but so far this is harming the engagement factor for the reader because the reader would want to skip this instead of read through it. Something like this might work in a movie, like a quick flashes or during an investigation scene from the FBI or CIA, as they look for Niles Ortega, but that wasn't in this book. So that's just wishing for something actually entertaining while we are bored by this book instead. On to Chapter 1. Page 1. Part 1, the Obelisk event. For anyone wondering, an obelisk is that division sign that we use in math, but it can also be used to mark someone who has died, like in a document. Or in an ancient text, it was used to mark something that is false, corrupt, or doubtful, kind of like the ancient Greek meme of pressing X to doubt. From what I see, the obelisk event is either going to be something that divides the nation, someone dies, there is some kind of doubt or corruption, and or all the above. Honestly, it's not a bad title to give a part because this is the first part, this is where all the exposition lies, and this is where we're supposed to get our first plot point. So, to give the vague promise of something that's interesting and brings in some tension is not a bad way to start. That is, as long as you know what an obelisk is, and that's going to limit the number to like 10 people, and one gorilla who learned it by accident through sign language. Also, speaking of gorillas and sign language, this entire story is going to revolve around that very thing, but minus the gorilla, and minus the sign language.
So you're telling me there's a chance?
What I mean by this is that a good way to begin such a story is by using an allegory for the story, so the reader can be invested and relate to the situation. If it was me writing this, I would have started the story with someone like The Rock in Rampage, where he was teaching the gorilla how to do sign language and could talk to it that way. The gorilla could have also been used for a Bigfoot reference, just saying. Chapter 1 begins with the location, the date, and the numbers of the stock exchange. Yeah, it says that the Nasdaq is at 2,679.05, and the Dow is at 13,242.85. Why do we need to know this? I have no idea other than I could imagine Lindsay learning it by proxy and she decided to put it in there so that her notes don't go to waste. If anything, I expect the stock exchange numbers to go down as things get more chaotic. But you can do that with literally anything else and much more efficiently. If you're going to start with something like this, you might as well add in some kind of newspaper headline or a newscast to set the tone and chain of events as it goes from being based on reality to becoming its own alternate history. But that's what a good writer would do, and we're dealing with Lindsay. Pity. Then we get to our first sentence, which is supposed to be the most important sentence of the book, if not the first paragraph. On the morning of the second meteor, Korra's 1989 Toyota Camry gave up the ghost for good. Just like Breach of Peace, we did get a decent first sentence, and I am happy to give credit where credit is due. The mention of the second meteor tells us that there was another meteor previously, which brings up tension, while Korra's car crapping out brings conflict to the character. We want to see tension and conflict almost always at the same time, because this is what causes us to keep on reading. We are hoping that the second meteor gets explained further rather soon, while Korra is hoping her car starts. This gives actions for the character to do as they engage in their conflict, and tension gives the reader thinking to do as they are engaged in the mystery behind the chain of events outside of the conflict. First sentence gets a thumbs up. Let's see how long that thumb stays up, shall we? The rest of the first paragraph goes over how her car has died. Her first and only car. This kind of moment reminds me of that introductory scene in Gremlins where Billy's car died, and later on he's able to use it to drive away once the Gremlins start doing their shenanigans. I'm pretty sure there's a moment like that later on in the book. There was something about a car starting a few chapters from now, but I think this is a good time to announce an elephant in the room.
Because I was watching the new Invader Zim movie, Enter the Floorpuss, and as I was watching it, I was like, holy shit, I forgot how much Invader Zim kind of crept into, like, the world building. It's almost sort of like Invader Zim played straight, like, which I'm sure Jonan Vasquez would be horrified by. Like, even Kaylee Donaldson of Pajiba pointed this out. It's sort of like Ampersand is almost like if Invader Zim was competent.
This book is claimed by the author to be loaded with references to other things, and personally for me, this is not a problem. I understand a lot of people would go, oh, that's lazy, and it really isn't. It's just postmodernist in the way she does it. References done through the narrative are postmodernist, and references done through the characters are modernist. The difference is because the narrator is talking to the reader while the character is talking to another character from their world. This is why TV shows don't really get that bad of a rep when they do references with their characters saying them, because they are simply people of their time interacting with other people of their time. We are going to find some issues here and there in this regard, so I wanted to preface it with a quick explanation on my views of it before we hit them. Also, I always hear people remarking on how Korra has a weird name or that it's too unique. Not really. It's Greek. It just means maiden, which relates to the moon I mentioned on the cover since Korra means maiden, and this direction of the crescent is the maiden goddess. Are we entering a conspiracy theory to determine if Lindsay's a Wiccan? Sure, why not? Because it's more entertaining than anything in this book.
This sucks more than anything that has ever sucked before.
Well, that's for damn sure. Whoop. Sorry, I'm already ragging on it, and we haven't even really read into it yet. Another thing to note about the name Korra is that this name is another name for Persephone, the Greek goddess of death, life, grain, and destruction. She relates to the Roman goddess Labira, the goddess of fertility, wine, and agriculture. You can already tell this is a self-insert when we bring up the goddess of wine part, because Lindsay is known as quite the heavy drinker. But what is interesting is that Korra is meant to relate to the monomyth of abduction by a monstrous figure, which in the case of Persephone, it was Hades who abducted her. In the monomyth, Hades came from a cleft in the ground where Persephone was gathering flowers, and there is an extension to the myth where Persephone starves the humans above out of anguish. So Zeus brings her back to the world above. But before he does, Persephone was tricked into eating pomegranate seeds by Hades. And because the pomegranate was the fruit of the underworld, This forced Persephone to return to Hades every winter, thus causing nothing to grow during the winter due to her absence. This beautiful pre-modernist myth was later reimagined by more modern stories, with one of the more famous ones being Beauty and the Beast, which seems to be a Disney movie that Lindsay admires since she reviewed Disney movies heavily as the nostalgic chick. Beauty and the Beast had a female human kidnapped by a beastly prince, who was cursed to be so because of his beastly personality. So, once the beast learns how to act human and be loved by another, the curse is broken and he is back to being human. An abduction monomyth where it comes to alien abduction fits into this kind of story. I honestly admire the connection in this regard, and throughout the reading I hope she doesn't mess it up. However, she has to mess it up, because the story is postmodernist. The goal of postmodernism is to deconstruct these previous monomyths and use them as an intertextual backdrop to juxtapose with. What that means is that any pre-modernist symbolism is no longer valid or relatable to the work. No modernist themes relating to Beauty and the Beast are applicable here either. Instead, any of these would be outliers and non sequiturs, because her book had the intention to deconstruct all of this down to this very core. Advice for the viewer: mixing pre-modernist symbolism with postmodernist symbolism is like mixing oil and water. You can do it, but it doesn't really work, and it's obvious when it doesn't work. Honestly, I don't even realize the whole correlation until I checked out the TV tropes page, and because all this time I thought she went with Korra as an homage to Korra from Avatar: The Last Airbender. And I thought she did this because both of them are brown. I mean, that's how it would work as a postmodernist story, but according to the TV tropes page written by who I can only assume is the world's biggest Lindsay fan, she went with a modernist approach in honor of her love for Disney movies, which are both the movie Hercules and the movie Beauty and the Beast. I would love to talk about this more, but we're only one sentence into the first chapter, and it's probably better that I talk about this when it comes up, eh? So, Korra's car is dead, and she's already late for work, even though this bitch seems like she does absolutely nothing in her spare time. We then have someone called Demi come out of what we assume is the house Korra was living in. I apologize because of the Greek mythology references. I have to explain why this character is named Demi, because she is Korra's mom. In the Greek myth, Demeter is Korra's mom, and the name Demi is short for Demetra, which means follower of Demeter. After I mention the mythology, you can see how this relates. But all this effort gets thrown out the window as we venture further into the story, because Lindsay didn't realize she was putting pre-modernist symbolism into a postmodernist story. A good way to explain the issue here is to talk about the movie Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?, which is a postmodernist satire of the American myths like Robert Johnson selling his soul to the devil, and the Greek myth of Homer's Odyssey. This movie uses pastiche, an artwork that imitates another artwork style, and it uses metafiction in order to create a new story about Odysseus' journey, but place it in an American South during the Great Depression. Lindsay's book is very similar, where she seems to have put the Persephone abduction myth into the American Southwest during the Hamburger Crisis, which is also known as the Great Recession. And yes, I said Hamburger Crisis. That is literally the name they gave it in Thailand, because the US is the land of the free and home of the Whopper. Now, the naming in connection to the Greek myth within a juxtaposed location of the Hamburger Crisis, California, is not a bad idea. I would say it's actually a really good idea. The issue comes with how she executes it, because this requires a proper execution. This is the difference between pre-modernist and postmodernist. Pre-modernist has the benefit of just being explained to you, and you are able to get chills from the symbolism because it's classical. It's in the form and structure that gives it its beauty. Postmodernist stories rely on execution, because we are no longer dealing with symbolism, but instead we are dealing with intertextuality. Lindsay would have to use the culture and location and events of Southern California in order to bring any light to the juxtaposition with the Greek mythology, having its events play through and characters functioning as stand-ins who relate to the myth but change it due to the pastiche and playfulness. In other words, the outline is fine so far, and this is actually a really promising looking postmodernist type of story, as long as you're a fan of something like Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And the story has a similar playfulness and a charm to it. I swear, I'm not going to ramble on like this every sentence. I just want to explain postmodernism before I get too deep into the story, so that you don't have to have me repeat myself over and over again and be like, what the hell is he talking about with these random words? With the second paragraph of this book started, let's get back into it. Cora asked her mom for a ride to work, and her mom is super disappointed and just tired of her shit. But please, don't assume that Cora's experience relates in any way to Lindsay, because she said in her Q&A video that her and Cora are nothing alike due to Cora being Latinx, who's poor, and Lindsay being a pampered white woman. Her words, not mine.
I was extremely ambitious and, like, honestly borderline entitled. Like, I did not know how to deal with failure. Like, I still don't. I also like to think I'm a lot funnier than she is. Like, I'm more witty than she is.
Page 2. We are given an explanation as to why Demi is giving Cora a ride instead of telling her to get bent. The reason is not because she's a loving mother struggling to make ends meet for her daughter, but instead her motive is because if her daughter is late for work, then Demi is punished by a temp agency she works for, because Demi is the one who recommended her daughter. Apparently in this situation, if Cora gets herself fired, then somehow through Californian magic, Demi is also fired. Right away, we have to press Obelisk to doubt. It is absolutely bullshit that someone who works at a temp agency would get fired because of what another person does, just because they vouch for them? It would be like firing a manager because another employee quit.
You're fired!
Fired?
You were there for 23 years, why didn't you do anything? If you had the secret reason you didn't do anything, you had the chance to do it, you had the secret reason you didn't do anything. Why is that? I just say that's interesting. Get the hell out of here!
That's not how it works, and the only reason Lindsay would think this is if she never interacted with a temp agency or pretty much never worked a typical job in her entire life. At least in California. The thing is that this story takes place in California, and in that state there are two laws in effect. An employment agent is not able to be held liable for what a client does, and also it's an at-will employment state. At-will employment means that the employer can fire someone for no reason, and the employee can leave for no reason. Also, the law in California is that you're not forced to join a union, but there are jobs that will trick you into thinking that you are forced to, thanks to misleading wording, which is why I think maybe Lindsay thought that this was the case for temp agents. The thing is that the law comes before the company policy, so no matter what, follow the law instead of what the company tells you. That is, until we enter our fully recognized and accepted cyberpunk dystopia, but that's not going to be until something more like 2077. The problem with this passage is twofold. It's a forced drama based on nothing, and also it's being told to us instead of shown to us. Lindsay could have just told us through dialogue, but instead she puts a random paragraph in there that is easily overlooked with how passive it is, and all the highway jargon. Like, first it says they're going through the 110, then at the end of the paragraph it says they're going under the 105. Then on top of that it says that Demi is making herself late so that her daughter is less late? I guess it's fine to be late for work in the eyes of the temp agency, but don't you dare miss an entire day or else they're gonna fire broke ass. I also don't get how these people are poor. Cora works as a data entry clerk fresh out of college. It doesn't say how much she gets paid, but somehow she lives with her aunt, and I think she lives with her mom and younger brother. And somehow these three working women don't have enough money to live in a tiny house on the Mexican side of town. Either these people are really bad with money, or Lindsay is really bad at writing Mexican characters because they aren't that bad with money. I mean, I would say a white liberal woman is bad with money before I say a Mexican mother is. Especially in the time when they had paper coupons for everything. I still remember that triple coupon day fondly. Le sigh. Cora's mom calms down enough to be like, yo, what happened to that money I loaned you? We are then told how Cora's hair looks, because that money was for the fan belt of the car and her hair dye. Her hair is described as wet hay color, which I assume is supposed to mean dirty blonde. Either that, or she has her hair as green as an anime character. The problem with this kind of description is that Lindsay tried to make it sound more fancy or original in how something like hair color is described, but it comes off as confusing. Like, we're told that she is Latinx, then we're told that she has dirty blonde hair, while she dyes her hair more blonde. The trick that everyone uses to describe a person in a story is to do two things: tell people the eye color and the hair color. There is a belief that as long as the eye and hair color are known, then that's all we need to know about the character. Thankfully, Lindsay does go into a bit more description later on, if I remember correctly, so I can consider her descriptions as passing. What sucks with most stories is that you're either going to get way too much description or not enough. For me, I don't care too much to describe how someone looks. Instead, I like to describe how they act, how they portray themselves, the mood they give other people, and anything that's noteworthy. Of course, we're going to mention something like scars, or tattoos, or a big juicy ass. Something to get the reader interested, something to relate to the theme, and something to imagine as the plot goes on. The goal is to make the reader imagine it in a way that is effective, but not forceful. This hair dye thing feels forced because it has nothing to do with anything later on, and it's trying to make us imagine her with two hair colors as if she's something special. But there's not really anything as a postmodernist theme that I can attach to the blonde thing. Maybe if I really look hard into it, I could say that the blonde hair represents Cora trying to attach herself to her German roots. But then her Latinx roots overwhelm it because she associates herself more with her Latinx side. But even then, that wouldn't make sense due to her original hair color being dirty blonde. It's something where I can almost see usefulness in the sentence so that it's not a complete waste of time, but then I am probably being far too generous, and I'm not sure if it's a postmodernist reader who would see that the same way. Cora lies to her mom about where she spent the $200. She says she spent it on gas, and instead she spent it on some concert. Consider this bad writing, but at the very least we can call this realistic because I know far too many Californian women who have done this. Far too many. It seems Cora went to a Nico Case concert, and I actually did find the listing of where Nico Case had a concert in LA. This was 2 months prior to this event, so for Cora to have used the money to go to a concert, she would have had to spend it on gas and pay a bill about 2 months ago for this reference to make sense. It's a bit of a stretch, but I'll allow it. Personally, I have no fucking clue who Nico Case is. It seems that she was with the New Pornographers, and they did that song Electric Version that was on Rock Band, and that's literally the only place I know them from. Maybe it's part of that indie scene from the 2007s that I know nothing about, but this does allow me to segue into an important thing to note. This entire story is set in 2007, and there's almost nothing I can really use to say, yes, this is totally double O's, but back then, something like hair color was all about frosted tips and chunky highlights, not just a flat-out blonde color, unless someone was going for a Gwen Stefani look, which is just an homage to the bleach blonde Marilyn Monroe type of thing. Either way, Lindsay tried to make the story totally 2000s for nostalgia, since she was the nostalgic chick, but most of the time it just looks like sad attempts at references. Nostalgia is about being sentimental about things from our past, or even a past we haven't been to, in order to have a euphoric feeling that makes you want to enter that time era. I personally am very nostalgic for the 50s, and that's why one of the first fantasy stories I wrote was based on 50s aesthetics. The problem is that people like Lindsay don't know how to apply nostalgic elements, and it seems she didn't know how to make something look dated, since there isn't much of a technological difference between the 2000s and the 2020s. The best thing that she could come up with was that they had a flip phone or a Nokia brick or whatever instead of a modern smartphone. If you, dear viewer, want to write something from a different time period, try to understand the difference between current technology and past technology. Try to capture the difference in how the music sounds and what is considered popular, rather than throw a reference in there and hope it sticks. The problem is that Nico Case having a concert doesn't make it sound dated, due to the fact that the singer is still doing concerts. If anything, Lindsay should have said something more like a Linkin Park concert, if she was going to mention a concert at all. Take something that was popular and kind of influenced that generation. And when you think of it, then you can think of that time period. I get it, Stranger Things had it easy by making things look totally 80s, and that's not fair, but 2007 was still pretty distinct from our time. We still use CDs, we went out to rent DVDs from the Blockbuster, we just barely got Blu-ray for the PlayStation 3, we had Scene and emo kids who now call themselves LGBT, and we relied on cable television because our internet was plugged into the phone line. I'm saying it here, if this book doesn't make reference to those tiny TVs that everyone had in their room, I'm calling this book one giant LARP. This is the same problem Daniel had in his book, Breach of Peace. These author-tubers don't seem to understand what a setting is. Setting is not pop culture references or tech level. Setting is about philosophy, culture, geology, and ecosystem. Demi tells Korra that the next time Korra must take the bus. And I don't understand this sentence at all. Why tell Korra to take the bus if Korra is late by car, and Demi could have just taken her to the bus or whatever today instead of to work? Demi contradicts herself against her own reasoning as to why she's driving Korra, but I guess Demi thinks Korra will learn her lesson after a slight scolding? Part of me thinks Lindsay is entirely incapable of understanding how a mother looks at things, but that's kind of expected since she willingly killed her own child. Okay, that's a low blow, but you have to admit, the place she hit her baby with a coat hanger was also a low blow.
Wow!
We're told that Korra feels that her life is out of control because she spent money on a concert instead of her car's fan belt. I'm sorry, but this doesn't make her character have depth. This just gives density to Korra's skull. This bitch is a knuckle-dragging brainlet with how she thinks her own actions are out of her control. And this isn't Korra explaining it to her mom. This is Lindsay explaining it to the audience, as if we're just supposed to accept it. Possibly a fan of Lindsay's would clap like a seal and just accept it, but the average reader is able to smell this kind of bullshit from a mile away, because it's that blatantly obvious. I guess this story is written for people who like to blame others for their own actions, so in other words, this story is written by Lindsay for Lindsay. But what's hilarious is that Lindsay has Korra thinking it like, if I have to deal with having no car and my mom yelling at me at the cost of going to a concert once, then, oh well, that's life. Yeah, you know, say c'est la vie, which is actually a song from the 2000s that really defined the era. If Lindsay wanted to put references in her story, why not have her mom turn on the radio and then have that song start playing as Korra looks out the window, and then we can have an LA explained to us, to show the urban decay of the world around her. Instead, we get Lindsay telling us that Korra feels miserable with her life, and we're just supposed to accept it as gospel because symbolism is hard. Korra does look in the car mirror, however, and sees a black town car race up behind them super close. Two dudes are driving, one is East Asian and the other is a white guy with giant aviator sunglasses. The cliche is that this means government officials with aviator sunglasses, but what's the point of having an Asian guy and why isn't he wearing sunglasses? Also, the Asian guy is supposedly cursing a cosmic force that made him wake up early. That's not how government jobs work, and this isn't early. Korra is late after all. I'm also not sure how she can tell he's cursing the idea of waking up early. Is he yawning? Is he stretching? Is he doing that thing where you brew coffee in the morning and scratching your side as you crack your neck? I don't even know who's driving. Is it the Asian guy? Should we be worried?
Watch out! Turn without signaling! Hit the brakes suddenly! Driving the wrong way!
What Lindsay understood is that you're supposed to bring up questions to have the reader ask them, and that creates tension. She understood it that far. What she missed from the equation is that these questions should be related to the plot, not the event, unless this detail is important for the plot. For example, let's say I have a scene where someone sneaks into a house. We should know the kind of house, who owns it, why the dude is sneaking into it, how he gets into the house, you know, things that let us get immersed. We should know these things, but not the end result that ruins the plot or the possible twist. The part where we are wondering who these guys are, totally fine. That's the plot. the part where we don't know who's driving or what they are doing to express the stuff we're told about, this is a description gap, not tension. I do not feel tension from incomplete descriptions. Instead, I feel like the writer needs to look over her work again and finish her paragraphs. We don't want the reader to feel that, because then the reader would be annoyed by it instead of enjoying it. So, advice to your writers out there, if you're going to explain what a character looks like, you might as well explain what they are doing in relation to their importance. If they are not important enough to explain their actions or their individual purpose in the story, then there's nothing you can really explain about them, so don't feel obligated to. Lindsay could have gotten away with, there were two figures in the car wearing cartoonishly large aviator glasses to hide their features, and that would be plenty for these two goons that we never see again. Another thing to keep in mind when describing characters is that you should see how important they are to the story. A character who is simply mentioned and never seen again only deserves a sentence of description, and someone who is with us the entire story deserves more than just a sentence. This applies to any kind of writing, postmodernist or not. Page 3. Cora freaks out when she sees the obvious men in black in a black car tailgating them. And her mom is like, "Oh yeah, those guys. Don't worry about them. I think they go to work the same time I do." This part is an obvious joke, making fun of how some people are absent-minded or don't pay attention to things but still notice it being there. The joke doesn't land, however, because we're being told that somehow the LA highway is going to be the place where a person sees someone else who doesn't work for the same company, and somehow they will see them nearly every day right behind them. This makes Demi look cartoonishly absent-minded. It doesn't fit in the narrative that's meant to take itself seriously as how this story is supposed to. Granted, this story and plot is goofy because it involves a raging alcoholic college dropout falling in love with an intergalactic biocyber alien, but Lindsay still tries to treat this book as if it's a fine wine. Also, when Lindsay wrote the part where Cora is a college dropout, it seems she thought during a tension time was a good time to mention this. She drops it here and never really mentions it again. But I think she mentions it chapters upon chapters later. Some advice here, dear viewer. If you're going to bring up information about a character, bring it up at an appropriate time where the subject is about the info you're dropping, so that the reader pays attention and actually cares. If you drop it like this, the reader is not going to care about it, because it's a non sequitur among the other stuff that's already going on that we really don't care about.
No, and I don't care.
She might as well have mentioned having a boyfriend, or say the first time she had Arby's, and her boyfriend giggled at the sandwich and said, "Hey, it looks kinda like your kid shitter." The time in question isn't explained with such a name drop either. What am I supposed to imagine with UCI? That she is not in high school? That it could have been a few years ago, or just yesterday? This is not an effective way to introduce the reader to the timeline, which is something that Lindsay claimed she spent a big chunk of her outline scheduling on perfecting. If her timeline doesn't tell us the time, then what the fuck is the point of the goddamn timeline? Speaking of time, it's about time we get back to this amazingly convoluted story, and we'll leave this time complaint in our back pocket for when we really need it. And if we ever hit book 2, we are going to need it. Cora studies the two clowns in the town car, and this would have been the time to describe their characteristics if she wanted to, but I guess it was more important to mention their race first and then their purpose after. We're told that these people must be out of state because they don't have a front license plate, which doesn't really make sense since pretty much every single state around California except for Arizona requires a front license plate. So she could have just said they must be from Arizona, unless we're going to go with Harold and Kumar logic and assume that these are Mexicans straight out of Mexico.
We got us here, brothers! Oh. Mexicans!
It seems that Lindsay thought this would cause tension for the reader because it makes us wonder who these people are and why they are tailgating Cora. But this is also the worst place to put something like this since people drive around LA from out of state all the time, and none of the police there care about the front plate. Many times, people just put it on the dashboard as they give a percentage of a shit, and Lindsay should know that the LA highway is the last place people are going to be following state laws. If anything, I would have had her say, "Who the fuck drives a Lincoln Town Car in LA?" Everyone knows that if you want to blend in with the Mexicans, that you'd get a Monte Nissan and a van, so that you can pretend that you're carrying a big family in the back. Part of me thinks this town car was meant to be a reference to The Matrix, since the agents would drive Lincoln cars as an homage to Detroit and typical mafia cars. But that's a Continental, not a town car. It's cool to think that she tried to make a cultural reference in her postmodernist story, because that does fit, but if you get the city wrong, and you get the car wrong, and you get the genre wrong, what the hell are you doing? Another bit of advice from what should have been a random reference to completely ignore. If you're going to reference something, have the reference make sense. Otherwise, this reference is a non sequitur, and it's a waste of time. We might as well have this calm and relaxing chase scene be a Family Guy style cutaway. And, speaking of it being calm and relaxing, there's another problem on this page that plagues the entire book. Lindsay writes her action and suspenseful scenes as if she's slowly describing a seedy little bar in a gumshoe pulp story, minus the poetic prose. What I mean is that we're supposed to feel tension with the scene, but she goes, "Don't worry about it, sweetheart," and has it float on by.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it, sweetheart.
Like we shouldn't care. I'm sorry for giving another bit of advice so soon. Well, maybe that's a good thing. But when you explain important scenes, write it in a way for the reader to know it's important. I like to go by the rule of, the more important it is, the more time I spend on it. And Lindsay should have definitely copied that from my notes. Lindsay does the exact opposite. The more important something is, the more passive and abrupt she makes it. If it was me, I would have made this whole first chapter about the car following them, making turns the same time they do. They try to go into a back alley to lose them, and then Cora would come out of the alley to confront them and goes, "Why are you following us?" And as she goes around the corner, but then there's nobody there. Then I would have a homeless person all cracked out who ironically looks at her like she's crazy, since this kind of story is in desperate need of a funny bone. At first, I thought the breach of peace was dry, but it at least attempted to do humor, and it works sometimes. This book is like reading the script to a random educational video about sand and Jimmy Neutron.
Dear Ahmedia, today I moved a 1-ton boulder across the broiling desert sands. Then I had lunch. Then they cut my tongue out.
It is intentionally and, dare I say it, extremely bland. I feel like an extra from The Mummy where every time I turn the page, I get my soul sucked out more and more. No wonder her readers are cat ladies. They're the only people who would survive this onslaught. Lindsay then tells us that Cora hasn't listened to NPR Morning Edition in a while. Because we all know how popular NPR was in 2007, the thing about NPR in this book is that Lindsay claimed that she herself only listened to NPR for her news, because she thinks it's the only trusted source. But that's like saying you only watch Trevor Noah because you're skeptical about all those other news networks. In the story, she also tells us that the Dow was fluctuating, which is a hint about the recession that occurs about a year after the story is taking place. From what I've heard, this is not mentioned ever again until the second book, and it's mentioned once. So what she expected was for a throwaway line from the first book to travel all the way into the second book, and then have the reader who is from 2021 go, "Oh my god, there's a recession happening in this book from my recent past? I was there, this is so relatable, oh, nostalgia blast!" Are you sure that's a good idea, Lindsay? Your beta sims might not be able to read the rest of it because of how much they splooge in excitement in getting all the pages hot and sticky. But it's not at all bad, because after this mention of the DAO, we get a mention of something called Broken Seal, which is what I assume is what you get after a walrus finds a tight seal at a Tupperware party. Here, she throws her exposition through a news report, and that's actually a good way to do it. Points given for doing it through a news report. It's so much better than telling us through the narrative, and it shows that it's newsworthy. The news says that the Broken Seal is a website that became the lead, or spearhead, for something called the Transparency Movement. My first thought is, oh, this is like InfoWars. And I'm actually excited because now, I'm expecting an Alex Jones homage to pop his head into the book and start screaming about gay frogs as he sits on top of his giant black Humvee and goblins throw coffee at him. This is an amazing opportunity that she didn't take. This is a story about aliens during 2007 in California, featuring a conspiracy website behind a global movement, and Lindsay made it boring. I'm no longer looking for bad writing. I'm now looking to see how this is even possible. How, Lindsay? How do you make this boring? There's not even a Dale Gribble reference? There's not even a sunburned Swedish guy with wacky hair from the History Channel talking about aliens? There's nothing! This has got to be intentional. There's no way someone can accidentally avoid everything entertaining with a premise like this. Like, how do you Google conspiracy theory for research as a media critic, and you find nothing related to put in your book? That's apparently is supposed to homage Invader Zim as well?
Diarrhea.
From her own words, it's supposed to reference Invader Zim, Transformers, The Arrival, Independence Day, and a bunch of other stuff that I personally couldn't even find in the writing. I'm actually puzzled when people like Lindsay and basically every other author tube says they are putting a reference in their book. Okay, where is it? Do I have to start my own conspiracy website and a transparency movement to start connecting the dots? I found the obvious Independence Day and The Arrival ones because both of those are in the plot, but the rest is anyone's guess. I guess I have to make a third writing advice for the stamp page, so advice for you, dear reviewer. If you're going to intentionally reference something in your book and tell people the reference is there, actually fucking put it in there. As for the Broken Seal as a name, meh. It's not bad and it's not good. It's a name that represents a group who breaks the seal of approval on information because they want the government to be more transparent with things, and this is hinted that it includes information on aliens that the government has been hiding later on. None of this is explained in the story, mind you. I'm just explaining it so you understand what's going on. This is why I say, because the theme with its name has Lindsay set it and forget it. When we meet the group later on, we're going to see how these people fit into the theme of transparency and what they have to say for it, which will determine how good the name is. So, another thing to put into our back pocket. The only information about the group after this is that the Broken Seal was founded by Cora's dad, Niles Ortega. Sadly, this is dropped on us in the same sentence where they say he released a controversial leak, but nothing is said about what this leak was. So far, we know nothing about the group or what they talk about. We don't know the significance of this group other than they are newsworthy on NPR of all things. We also aren't told that this is Cora's dad until later. This kind of moment is iffy. I'm glad when we are able to figure out information instead of having it spoon-fed to us, because that means we are going to be paying more attention to every little word said, which gives importance to pretty much every sentence. However, this is to assume we were already doing it from the start, and this would require a story to be intriguing from the start. There's a movie called Drive that is one of my most favorite postmodernist neo-noir movies. The book is just as good, if not better. In this book, we have the same approach where we are to pay attention to what is written because we are not spoon-fed anything. So, I'm not saying this is a bad thing to do. I love it when people do this. More writers should do this, but This is an advanced level writing style that requires the right tone and syntax. Lindsay doesn't have a tone or syntax that can resonate with this style. Her writing style is more like young adult, where everything is supposed to be handed to you and not really described because it makes it easier for you to imagine it yourself. The sentence right here where her dad is mentioned, but we are supposed to find out it's her dad only a few pages later, is exactly what's wrong with this book. It gives you all these things in hopes that you find it intriguing or important, but then it doesn't give you a reason to think of it as intriguing or important. It's like ordering food at a drive-thru and then after your long and boring order you go, oh yeah, and that thing that I ordered in the beginning, it's for my cousin. It gets to the point where people won't be able to tell if that person lacks social skills or is fucking with them. Demi is the one who changes the channel after her ex-husband is mentioned, which is supposed to show that she's feeling emotionally charged from just the mention of his name. But we don't know it's her ex-husband yet, so this part doesn't really mean much to the reader unless they are going through a second read. Even if someone was crazy enough to read this a second time for their own enjoyment and not to dismantle it for a crappy YouTube channel run by a drooly monkey, the part that gets me is when Cora shoots her a look. We don't know what kind of look it is, but it's a look and it's something that makes Demi go, sorry, it's too early, with a cold smile. Why did Cora give her a look and why did Demi say sorry? If this is supposed to be the dad who left Cora and the ex-husband who left Demi, what's the point of being sorry and what's the point of a look? And why a cold smile that's supposed to be emotionless? Why not a mirthless smile, which would be more appropriate since Demi is not being cold towards Cora? Or is she? Who knows? It seems Lindsay wanted her readers to ask questions about her book, but didn't know how to put in tension. So she just wrote confusing sentences that don't make any sense to fill in the gaps. But then Cora says, it's okay, I don't want to think about it either. Which is supposed to be in reference to the dude leaving them to start his conspiracy website, which is supposed to be super important for the world, and is the main theme of the story portrayed by the blurb, where it says, truth is a human right. I understand when a character is flawed and then they have to grow towards the main theme to learn about it as they go along, that's fine. That's what a good story does. This story doesn't seem to be doing that. I say this because Cora shot a look at her mom, guilted her mom into saying sorry, but then it's like a switch was flicked and Cora did a mental 180 by being like, no, don't worry, I wanted you to do that. There are flaws, there is progression, and then there is inconsistency caused by bad writing. I think you know which one this is, and it's not the flaw or progression choice. It's the bad writing one, because this is what someone writes when they try to make characters realistic but don't know what realism means. Trust me, I know what her simps are thinking and how to defend this bad writing. They always go, but you don't understand. It's realistic because not everyone can be consistent all the time. No. Symbolic representation of a Lindsay fan from her subreddit? You are the one who doesn't understand. Realism does not mean inconsistent. Realism means complex and impulsive. Mistakes and inconsistencies are not the same thing. Changing your mind is not the same thing as an inconsistency in writing. And before anyone says it, no, intentionally being inconsistent doesn't magically turn this into good writing. The only way inconsistency could be done well is if the character is designed to be a representation of inconsistency. You know, something surreal or like from a David Lynch film. It would be part of the world and style. It would not be randomly here 1 second then gone the next. Inconsistency would be consistent from the writer because the writing would be consistent, even if the story or the character or world isn't. I understand that kind of thing is a lot to take in if you never thought of it, but again, I would consider that an advanced level writing concept that nobody who tried to write this kind of novel at Lindsay's level of writing skill should take on. It's a losing game at that point, especially when the story doesn't fit with such a thing. In other words, it's a terrible defense of bad writing that is a big reason as to why postmodernism looks bad these days, when it shouldn't look this bad. Page 4. Finally, after waiting 4 pages, we get a description of the area around us. It's not much, but it's like searching for water in a desert and you encounter a puddle of piss. It appears appetizing, even though it shouldn't. Lindsay describes the tall buildings of downtown LA as distant spires that are sprouting up in the haze. The haze is supposed to be smog from pollution, but she doesn't say that because she assumes everyone knows it's polluted, or she hopes nobody notices the haze is caused by pollution. I believe it's the latter because Lindsay is a progressive after all, and there's no way in the heck she's going to say something honest about her favorite city in the world. Also, spire is a strange word to use because it gives LA a religious connotation, due to the fact that spires in architecture are from Gothic structures, like churches, and the spire represents a narrowing path upwards into the sky, into heaven, if you will, which is why it's a symbol for heavenly aspirations, the things we believe are good to become heavenly. Los Angeles, which is Spanish for the angels, further reinforces this symbolism. So, Cora, seeing spires as a venture towards the angels, the heart of the angels, is a very nice way of expressing this kind of symbolism in a subtle yet accessible way. I say this is strange because this has nothing to do with the story. Nothing related to this is gained or mentioned within the city or from these buildings. Rather, it's all going to happen somewhere else. So this part is like if Lindsay was trying to hit a T-ball that's stationary and not moving at all, but she does a swing and a miss and just spins around in place. It's one of those missed opportunities that I'll be complaining about throughout this analysis. I just hope there isn't one on every page. God, I hope there isn't. As they go into downtown, the goons behind them stay behind them and are described as being bored. If this is meant to be a tense and serious moment, you know, where the reader is supposed to be engaged and have their heart pounding, then saying the word bored is the exact opposite of what you'd want to do. If the characters are bored, why would I be engaged? Why would I care about these events if the characters don't care?
Why?
I know it's not spelled this way, but they are called care actors. They are the actors you're supposed to care about, the characters. This is the part where most people stop reading. If you want your characters to be bored, make them bored way later in the story, after the reader has been invested into the plot. We don't have the plot yet, we have nothing yet. All we have is the protagonist acting goofy with her mom contradicting herself without skipping a beat, and 2 goons who are falling asleep at the wheel, which I can only assume is because they can hear this awful dialogue. If I was the editor of this story, I would have looked at it and said, this needs something to actually happen for the reader to turn the page. But then again, if I was the editor hired by Lindsay, I would have been told this is not needed because Lindsay is the reason for people to keep on reading. It's almost like St. Martin's Press, the company who published this book, thought that her brand recognition alone was enough for people to read past the first chapter. Little do they know, most people who enjoy aliens and sci-fi are not Lindsay fans. I mean, maybe some Star Wars or Star Trek fans know about her, but it's not enough. There's a big difference between a movie person and a book person, and for some reason everyone thought these were the same thing. Lindsay said that she wanted this book to get a movie adaptation, and she could imagine it being a movie. What movie begins with a broken car, a drive along a freeway, and the idea of 2 goons following some college dropout through a tent city in LA? And remember, this is meant to be a romance, so I guess this is a bit like how Twilight started? But I don't think people enjoyed that opening other than the beautiful scenery of that Washington forest kind of area. I think the issue here is that it's trying to be slice of life and suspense at the same time, which doesn't really mean much to the reader. Sure, Cora could be suspicious of these people following her, but this moment doesn't mean much to the reader because we're told by her mom that it's normal, and we don't see any threat from these people either. If we were instead introduced to some sketchy looking people, like those dudes from Halloween 3, where they kill someone and then we see them again later, then the reader could feel suspense, because then the threat is valid. We would understand the danger and we would understand why Cora is on the edge. If anything, this story should have started with the college encounter she had before, and that could have begun the entire suspicion and had her go down a conspiracy theory rabbit hole about the government. Cora should hate the government at this time and have knowledge on how to block things. She should be tech savvy and have a tinfoil hat on at all times. Her family members should be worried about her whenever they accidentally see her laptop screen from the corner of their eye. But none of this happens and we get nothing about the subject that is very important to the plot. She wrote all of this for the background and gave us nothing to work with in the foreground. If you ever wonder why this book drags on, that's why. There's also a weird part where Cora is talking to her mom about Nils and how he could have been the reason why they're being followed. As if we didn't realize that by the news report that was supposed to explain it. And she suddenly is not able to bob her head to the music comfortably because her shirt is small. I get it, women wear tight clothing and buttons suck when something's tight. It seems she gained weight, which is funny because she's supposed to be poor in the story. Consider me insensitive, but it seems only Americans get fat when they don't have money. I've heard of inflation, but this is ridiculous. Now, this brings us to a certain subject that I wanted to discuss a little bit more further, but I think it's okay to touch on it here. Lindsay is a woman who has, for lack of better words, let herself go into the obesity category. When she was the nostalgic chick, and in the Channel Awesome movies, she was in damn good shape. I honestly didn't recognize her in Kikassia. But when she was, I think around Cora's age in this book, she started to expand like her subscriber count. Wow. Trust me, I'm not calling her unattractive for being overweight or chubby. I actually find the voluptuous type sexy. Granted, Lindsay isn't exactly voluptuous because her side profile is spherical. But I think you know what I mean. This isn't fat shaming, it's just pointing out that Cora and Lindsay have a lot in common. Mostly in actions and reactions. They have different lives, but Lindsay wrote her protagonist as a college-educated progressive who became a chubby pencil pusher and is into geek culture while also enjoying pulp culture directed at women. This is the kind of stuff that turns this character into a self-insert. Whether she changes the identity or the race, or tiny bits of the character history, this doesn't remove the parts that are the self-insert. I can have myself self-inserted into something like Lord of the Rings as a hobbit, and I wouldn't be able to defend the connections with my personality and the characters by going, well, it's a hobbit and I'm not a hobbit. At that point, it would be like Kanye not understanding the gay fish joke. In Lindsay's Q&A video, she uses the defense that her and Cora are nothing alike because Cora is Latinx, blonde, and grew up poor, while Lindsay grew up pampered, white, and has dark hair.
Okay, from what I can tell, Cora is kind of a self-insert. So in what ways is Cora different from you? Besides her dad, of course. Do male authors get this question? I don't think she's a self-insert any more than any, everyman style protagonist is. I guess as I mentioned earlier, I don't really have much in common with her personality at all. She's good with kids. I am not. Despite being an oldest, her way of coping with the world is to kind of fade into the background. She's more of a water sign, I guess. She's kind of conflict averse. I am very confrontational. I guess she's Latina. I'm not. She's Catholic. I'm not. Never had any problems, supporting myself. Never had to move back in with my family. Never had this sort of contentious relationship with my parents. Certainly never called them by their first name.
This doesn't mean anything because Lindsay could make herself insert green and from the planet Mars. it would still be the writer making a self-insert because of the personality and reactions to stimuli. I want to mention this to point out that this book is borderline, if not actually, autofiction. This word might sound confusing to some and disagreeable to those who already have heard of it, but hear me out. Autofiction is a postmodernist genre that combines an autobiography with a fictional story. Very much like a published version of those fanfics we see where the writer self-inserts themselves into the world, and then talks about relationship problems or gay thoughts or like how their dad beats them. I am having trouble not seeing this story as autofiction. Cora is Lindsay in a different skin, and just happens to be from California instead of moving to it. Also, Lindsay would have been 23 in the year 2007, and this was when she just got out of college with her BA in film studies, with her becoming the nostalgic chick a year later. I am so glad she was one of the happy few who could put her useless degree to some use by becoming the hot dog girl meme. Cora, on the other hand, is about 20 and just dropped out of college. I don't want to start making accusations, but I do find it weird that Latinx Lindsay, Latinxy if you will, ended up failing college while white hillbilly Lindsay passed college. There's a lot of moments like this in the book where Lindsay writes her marginalized characters as incompetent or toxic, and pretends that this is a result of some kind of feminist/racist conspiracy theory. Yeah, sorry Lindsay, but it doesn't work that way. And this is stuff that's actually worthy of getting cancelled over. But she's safe because her book fans are mindless seals who clap and bark anytime she runs her labias across the keyboard. Afterwards, we are told that there is something called the ampersand event, and we are told that the prologue in the beginning was called the Friedma memo, and was leaked by the Broken Seal. This would have been okay if it was worded better. The way that she wrote it feels like there are all these new things, and they aren't to be paid attention to. Earlier in the chapter, Cora flips out because her mom said she saw the town car before and was blasé about it. But blasé is the perfect way to describe Lindsay's tone about everything that's important to the plot. Not only are we being told the part about the ampersand event and the Friedma memo, but we're also being told like it's not important. This kind of tone harms the entire story. While Breach of Peace has no tone at all, at least I understood what was important to the plot and what wasn't. Or at least whatever I could consider as separate from the red herrings. In this book, the narrative is like, yeah, there was a special event where we had first contact, everyone knows it, and there was a memo released talking about how the government has been trying to talk to them since while keeping them locked up. I don't know about you, but I feel better when I'm reading a story that makes important things feel important. It makes it fit, you know? What I don't get is that we were given a radio report, but this wasn't in the report. Why didn't Lindsay just have this info in the radio report? Well, like I said before, this is a postmodernist story, and postmodernism is all about non-linear storytelling and having the plot sort of all over the place. Think of something like Reservoir Dogs, but done poorly. I think Lindsay wanted to go for this non-linear way, but ended up having her plot being explained in chunks, where we get things that don't really matter to us first, and then later information is supposed to make us go, oh, so that's what the thing on the first page was about. Got it. I'm so happy I went through like 300 pages before I could have that explained to me and in a side remark. As you can see, it's not being engaging, it's just intentionally cryptic, as if her young adult audience was willing to flip back and forth like crazy and take notes on the book like they're studying for a test. I'm sorry, Lindsay, but young adult readers don't like it like that. They want the story spoon-fed to them so they can turn their brains off and enjoy the scenes for escapism. Also, I don't know how much I can stress on this, but this is literally a book about a college dropout trying to bang a giant space chicken. The plot sort of conflicts with this intentionally cryptic mumbo-jumbo. The ampersand event has yet to be explained to us, so her writing this with zero context means nothing to the reader until it's explained. And for a bit of a hint, the giant space chicken is named Ampersand. There's also a bit of a syntax problem within the same paragraph. It says, like the fan belt on the verge of snapping, the Broken Seal was a time bomb that would inevitably blow up in their faces. What she did was that she put a simile first, then a metaphor after. The blowing up in their faces part is in relation to the time bomb metaphor, meaning the broken seal is supposed to be the catalyst of something disastrous for their faces. But we don't know whose faces this is in reference to. I assume it's the government, but it is written as if the broken seal is going to be the victim of a metaphorical time bomb. The fan belt thing is just dropped the second the comma appears. It means nothing to the rest of the sentence. The sentence was written so horribly that I had to point that out. Some advice for you, dear viewer. There's no reason to combine two different metaphors. One is enough, and make sure you tell the reader what the subject is in relation to the metaphor when you make it, especially if it's meant to be a juicy zinger. Page 5. We're treated to what I can only assume is a montage as Cora works for 4 hours of data entry at her job called Kaiser. Kaiser is a popular hospital or medical whatever corporation in California, but I'm not sure if people know about it outside of that state. It's in like 9 states, and I guess you can call it a Californian thing, but not really. However, this brings up another issue that I started to think of while reading this story. What exactly makes a setting Californian? I mean, I don't expect people to be walking around the office with surfboards and long hair like a random scene from Chairman of the Board, but while reading this, I'm struggling to think of what exactly is California in this novel other than random name drops. The setting that Lindsay had made doesn't have an ecosystem outside of very general concepts like a highway or a building or a marsh. This ecosystem is separate from the culture, and instead of having a Californian culture, she replaced that with a progressive culture. And for that matter, she doesn't have a Californian ecosystem that can make us think of California. Where are the beaches and palm trees? Why has nobody eaten anything Californian like avocados or even a burrito? I'm still puzzled that Lindsay claims his book was inspired by Invader Zim, and I don't remember anyone eating a burrito. And especially when our protagonist is a damn Latinx. The bitch should be pulling out a burrito like Rob Reiner, whipping out burgers in that South Park episode. Also, the way this page is written, I think we came to our first issue of pacing. In a novel, we have paragraphs, and when a paragraph wants to transition from one scene to another, the writer is supposed to let the reader remove themselves from one scene and then become attached to the next one. This transition is from one paragraph to another. One paragraph says the scene is over, the next says that the next scene is starting. Throughout the entire novel, Lindsay never does this. I say this because in one paragraph, we have Cora leaving her mom's car and go to work, then go to lunch break, then look outside the window. The paragraph after this has her see the town car from before. There is one paragraph of stuff happening between her on the road, being chased by the town car, then for her to see the town car again. The lack of words being used to transfer the reader from one setting to another after we spend so much time in this previous setting is usually split by extra space or a chapter break, usually in the form of something like 3 asterisks or 3 spaced out periods. This tells the reader that we are in a different scene right away, without any misunderstanding. That's the technical error here, but then there's also a pacing issue. If you want tension to build, and you want something to look threatening, then you're not really going to be able to do that from 4 pages of nothing happening to a paragraph of rest to resume the nothing happening feeling. This is a pacing issue and a tone issue due to the fact that there are so many words spent on nothing happening, but then the parts of Cora's life that make up her existence as a pencil pusher is brushed away as an aside. If it was me writing this kind of suspenseful moment, I would have focused more on her everyday life as mundane, and then have a few moments of suspense break this rhythm once in a while, until there's a chase at the end of the chapter. Some people may think that's not interesting enough, and when I say some people, I mean terrible writers and reviewers. But this kind of opening is exactly what many postmodernist movies do these days. And David Fincher's The Game did this very thing, where the movie starts as mundane in the life of a rich guy, with the hook being this invitation from his brother to a place called CRS, where he will pay them to make his life more exciting. The beginning shows that his life is not exciting and is rather stressful, with this hook being a promise into the thrill of the thriller story. But throughout this opening, we get to learn about the main character, and we become attached to him and his personal experience. We actually become sympathetic to an otherwise unlikable cunt because we learn about his reason for being a cunt in the beginning, and we want to see him get through the game as the story progresses. I understand that Axiom's End doesn't do this because it's a sci-fi romance, but the first chapter is written as a thriller. If this actually was a sci-fi romance, why am I finding nothing romantic in the opening? Why am I finding nothing sci-fi in the opening? The only existence of sci-fi in the beginning is that there's a vague promise that aliens might exist, while there's nothing romantic in the opening. There's not even a mention of Korra wanting someone. The entire first chapter is about Korra being related to someone who's on the government's naughty list, and they might be following her on her way to work. I wouldn't mind if this was slice of life turned into romance or something like Mars Attacks, where we see aliens talk politics to the US government before we cut to random people from Nowheresville going over their personal stories as a homage to Golden Age B movies. But we don't get this. I don't see any homage. I don't know what this relates to, and I don't know why she thought it would be a good start on this terrible foot, other than maybe someone telling her to add tension, and she mistook that for suspense. For you, dear viewer, I shall explain the difference so you don't make the same mistake. Tension is for the reader, and is a moment of uncertainty that causes the reader to question what will happen next in the way of intrigue. They want to know what happens next. They are not confused by what might happen next. Suspense is about feeling anxious in relation to what you expect to happen next. You can have suspense without tension, and you can have tension without suspense. This is the basic flaw about our language that this book ironically didn't realize. Tension and suspense are not the same thing, even though the feeling may be similar or attached. Suspense is when you cringe at the venomous snake slowly slithering towards a sleeping person, while tension is after the snake bite and you wonder how the person will survive. Suspense uses our uncertainty and sympathy, while tension requires intrigue and curiosity. It's actually the same relationship that terror and horror have, where terror is before the event and horror is after witnessing it. I don't want to get into that one right now, because this isn't a horror novel, but I think I will get into that one with Breach of Peace once I reach the horror bits later on. Although, I hope that explanation cleared things up a bit. You don't need suspense in the beginning, you need tension. And Lindsay removed the tension to give us suspense. This is a terrible choice, because without tension, I don't care. And if I don't care, then I cannot feel the suspense. There's nothing for me from this chase unless I try to pretend that the idea of a chase sort of happening is already intriguing enough by it existing. Some people may feel that, but most people don't. I'm sorry, I ranted way too long about this particular issue, because this page keeps on giving, where the third person limited, I guess, narrator, has this line. Why God, why had she listened to Fergalicious instead of the news? This kind of line could have easily worked in first person or as inner dialogue from Korra within an italic segment. To have this kind of moment in third person, it means the narrator talks like and is Korra, but is like if Korra is talking in third person. I see this kind of issue from people who write first person their entire lives and then switch to POV all of a sudden. POV is a habit and is a part of the writer's voice. In first person, this comedic line would have worked, but in third person it just looks strange and alien, pun intended. I swear, I want to get the hell off this page, but it doesn't stop messing up. This is the worst page so far. I think this is the page most people quit if they aren't a die-hard fan or a sucker for bad writing. Or both. It gets worse because the narrator explains how the town Cargoons might be in the building and are planning to kidnap Cora. This makes Cora look really paranoid, with the reader not understanding why. And there's also a horrible zinger here. Probably, this was nothing. Possibly, it wasn't. The tone works here, but the two P words have to switch for it to make any sense. Probably is about probability, about making sense. Possibly is about the possibility, about the likelihood of this happening as an act that could be done. It is possible for anyone to be kidnapped. So of course it is possibly something for anyone. It is probably something that can happen for her specifically because she's on the government's naughty list because of what her dad does. We don't feel tension from a possibly. We feel tension from a probably. Then my favorite character pops up as Cora tries to escape through the elevator into the cafeteria because of course this bitch is thinking about food at a time like this. I get it that it's her lunch hour, but isn't she in danger? Well, either way, we meet Ellie Garrard, who has his backstory told to us instead of shown because Lindsay doesn't know how to wedge friends talking like normal into a conversation, but she's quick to wedge a snack break during a supposed chase scene. And for anyone wondering, Ellie is not my favorite because he's a scene kid who is a hacktivist. He's my favorite because we never see him ever again, from what I recall. And I love how there's more detail in this throwaway comedic relief than there is detail in Cora's entire life. That's postmodernism for you. Page 6. Ellie introduces himself by calling Cora Sembino, which is a male Spanish name meaning wise in Latin. I'm not sure if this is the intention with a nickname like how Cora is related to Greek mythology, but calling Cora Sembino is ironic on so many levels. It's like when you call a tall fat person with a tall fat cock tiny. You can't help but to think that this was given to her as an insult and she just rolled with it. And at the same time, I don't believe Lindsay thought that far into it. We will see some more wild names pop up in this story later on, such as a dog named Monster Truck. Ellie's name is Hebrew for my god, or something similar to ascend, like to elevate to a higher existence. And the judge named Ellie in the Bible has quite a fascinating story tied to him involving his child and God. Naturally, none of this makes a connection in the slightest in this story, because Lindsay couldn't be bothered to open a Bible and read from it. She most likely just named him Ellie because she thought it was Californian enough, even though Ellie is a more common name in Tennessee, usually pronounced as Eli, instead of like Ellie. I didn't want to really mention the meaning of names in the story considering it's postmodernist, but considering the story is about language, and it never once really dove into the concepts of language, and what our words actually say, I can't help but to criticize it in that regard. Why not have more meaning in names, or at least talk about the concept of words as the story goes on? Why not have a running theme of people misunderstanding each other, and getting the wrong idea with spoken word, but always understanding body language until certain people can't comprehend some kinds of body language? This is why I don't understand the theme of this story. So far, the story has nothing to do with its major theme, meaning this first chapter up to page 6 says nothing in relation to the rest of the story, outside of slowly introducing us to the characters that will be tortured by throughout the story, and one of them is a frickin' red herring. Ellie joins Cora in the elevator, and without being told anything, he is like, "Are you feeling bad about the broken seal?" I've heard of plot points being convenient, but this is the first time I've seen a convenient exposition. It seems Ellie is a conspiracy theorist who tries to be friends with Cora as a co-worker who works in tech. Somehow, he found out Korra is related to the Broken Seal through her father. But that shouldn't happen since Korra is said to have changed her last name, and I have no idea why she would let anyone know she's the daughter of someone she wants to break ties with. It's like if a child of a Nazi was being raised in Israel and accidentally showed people their grandfather's baby flesh lampshade collection. There's spilling beans, and then there's loading some in the shotgun and blasting beans across the room. She shot these beans across the room by doing an interview for the LA Times about her father and her relationship with him. Why did she do this interview? And why are we being told about it during a conversation with a random extra we never see again that has nothing to do with the interview? Who knows? It seems Lindsay thought it was a good idea to infodump as damage control, because she really wanted to start their conversation with the Broken Seal, but also didn't know how to justify that random outburst. A bit of advice for you, dear viewer. Not every conversation has to be about the plot. It's fine to have simple asides that build the world instead of making the plot shoehorned into every conversation. Us readers actually enjoy the idea of a break from the plot in order to become distracted and let our guard down, especially if this is meant to be a thriller type of moment. Many people complain that it's filler, but filler is different from character development or world building or a proper red herring. And when I say proper red herring, I mean something like a build-up to an actual twist, not whatever the fuck Daniel Green was doing, or whatever Lindsay is doing here with her opening for that matter. I say that because this entire scene at her Kaiser job is one giant red herring, as well as the chase in the beginning. She makes it seem she's going to be captured. Korra's running around like, oh god, I'm gonna be captured. And yet, no attempt at a capture is even tried. The entire time, I imagine Korra like that meme where someone looks like they're drowning, but they're just sitting on the ground with their head a little bit out of the water. Absolutely nothing was happening to her. Nobody cares. And somehow she's able to have a casual conversation with random extras we never see again despite her supposedly being in danger. Apparently Ellie is her friend at work because everyone else has been what was described as beastly, which I can only see as a reference to Beauty and the Beast, because other than that, I have no fucking clue what she means by beastly. I think this is because the term beastly is highly outdated and is currently only used around British circles. So for someone to come out with a British term about characters in California is the same strange colloquial slang issue that Daniel Green suffered from. Trying to mix British slang into an American setting or vice versa doesn't work unless the character is being British or their strange slang is called out by other characters. It doesn't work at all for the narrator to say it. Page 7 and 8. This is followed by Korra saying she thinks she's being followed. Lindsay had Korra console with a conspiracy theorist friend who's not really a friend because she thought this was the only way for someone else to explain how there were leaks of shady things happening from the government during the previous alien encounter that everyone is treating as a normal thing. Here we also suffer from Lindsay's infamous inability to portray temporal and spatial elements in her writing. Not to start talking about biological differences between men and women, but I am very sure Lindsay is rather feminine in this regard since women can't read a map for beans. This is due to a spatial comprehension limitation, so sometimes you have to give women a pass. You know, how people like Lindsay think being a feminist is all about giving women a pass so there can be some kind of fake equal ground that they somehow need despite these people also saying that men and women are equal. To explain how she sucks at understanding spatial elements, she has Korra and Ellie walk out of an elevator in one paragraph while talking. The next paragraph, they are in front of a bathroom. All I can think of is that there's an elevator with a bathroom right in front of it. A few paragraphs later, she mentions a cafeteria nearby, but doesn't say where it is. Am I supposed to understand what this building looks like or not? It seems that I'm not, but people have been defending the story as a minimalist writing style, which I had to scoff at because a minimalist writing style wouldn't have filler as the first chapter. Have you ever heard of those books where the book could have been reduced to something like a novella or probably like a short story, but it's only novel length because it's so packed with filler and nonsensical chapters that do nothing for the plot? Yeah, that's this book in a nutshell. So what the fuck are you guys on about with minimalist writing style? But this is sort of a way to do multiple interpretations in postmodernism, due to the setting being so vague and how it expresses where something is or what something looks like. However, all I am wondering at this point is, why do we know her random friend is a scene kid, but we don't even know if Cora works at a desk or a cubicle? I mean, really, what does her hair color do for us if this is supposed to be minimalist? Also, does anyone think minimalism makes writing better, or does it just make it easier for her to ramble on about unnecessary things like the lore of a character we only see in the first chapter, and never again, and he contributes nothing to the plot? There's minimalism, there's playfulness, there's non-structured storytelling, and then there's terrible writing. Can you guess which one of this is? That's right, it's terrible writing. And I guess maybe playfulness if it wasn't so dry. I don't mean to rant, but why the fuck are all these author tubers always writing their stories so dry? I am constantly telling people tone is the most important thing for your writing because this is what makes yours. And these author tubers are like, tone? What's tone? Is that some kind of new app for my phone? Diarrhea. Well, speaking of diarrhea, there is nothing but verbal diarrhea from these two characters about all of this exposition concerning the ampersand event, which was the previous meteor shower that had aliens arrive in a place called Pasadena near LA. And somehow Lindsay didn't want to have any of this in the radio broadcast from earlier. Remind me again why I have to wait 4 pages in the first chapter for information that I was supposed to get as a quick rundown through a radio broadcast. Like, was I supposed to be at the edge of my seat pissing myself in anticipation over finding out that there might have been an alien discovered in the ampersand event? Also, I'm not sure when these characters are supposed to know about aliens. Apparently, the leaked documents that made Cora's dad government enemy number 1 is the memo mentioned in the radio broadcast she was listening to and already heard about, where it talks about aliens being contained in the government lab and the government people are trying to communicate with them. But then here, Cora is like, I believe the ampersand event was just a meteor shower, and she leaves it at that. I don't know if this is a reference to characters like Agent Scully being skeptical of supernatural and esoteric events, even though she's constantly encountering them on a day-to-day basis. But I think Lindsay really messed up here. Cora is supposed to be the skeptic who had her whole worldview shattered when she first encounters aliens. And then, when she does encounter an alien, she treats it like she saw a random deer roaming around. I don't care if this is minimalist. I don't care if this is postmodernist. And I don't care what people want to say with any defense that they make for this.
I don't care!
A story cannot be contradicting itself like this if it wants to be good in any reader's eyes. These aren't twists and these aren't quirks. These are blatant continuity and tonal errors. The conversation between Eli and Cora ends pretty much with us learning that the government uses Men in Black style brain wipes, minus a cool flashing pen because we can't have anything creative in this story, and that Eli is really fucking annoying. He keeps on trying to get Cora to investigate the ampersand event, the Fridma memo, and he tries to get her to talk to her dad or something. I don't know, the way the conversation goes is really weird and chaotic, where these two people are having 2 different conversations. Eli never says, go talk to your dad, but then Cora is like, I want nothing to do with him. Eli was talking about how 5 people had their memory erased and got brain damage. That also reminds me of another thing. So 5 people get brain damage after the government took them in and nobody cares? Nobody started a campaign against the government? I mean, if it's known that the government did this and the story has yet to become a dystopia and we have the internet, then why is nobody doing anything? Not to get too political, but we did have a bunch of riots over a few deaths, but then I'm supposed to believe that nobody is going to riot after 5 people get their brains scooped out? Also, why didn't Lindsay mention the race of the 5 people? I thought representation was important. She describes the race of 2 goons that we never see again, but she doesn't want to say the race of 5 people who are actually part of the plot? Consider me officially offended. But what's really offensive is how this conversation literally went on for 2 pages and nothing was said. Advice for you, dear viewer. It's fine to have playful banter, and it's fine to have dialogue that is there to not really serve the plot. Character development is fine, entertainment is fine, comedic relief is fine. But what's not fine is dialogue that's focused on the plot and doesn't need to be there and doesn't need to be taking multiple pages, especially when we get nothing out of it. Ellie could have been avoided if Lindsay simply had her radio broadcast actually play, which would have been preferred, no matter how cliché she thinks it is, because it's not a cliché, it's a trope. Pointless banter that serves nothing to the plot? Now that's a cliché. Page 9 and 10. Ellie throws the only sensible line out during the argument he's having with Cora by going, "You're too caught up in your anti-daddy agenda," which made me laugh at how much that seems to be directed at Lindsay from Lindsay. I know, her dad died of Parkinson's and everyone was shaken up about it. But I don't see someone like Lindsay showing even a hint of respect from her dad. In her documentary, The A Word, she even shows her father being disappointed in her. He's pro-life, she's pro-murdering babies, but only when it's hers. I couldn't imagine how much anger she had towards her father to be the kind of person she turned out to be. And all of this anger seems to be siphoned through the story in the form of Niles Ortega being this German conspiracy theorist who's the leader of a bunch of diet Nazis. Cora runs into the bathroom because being called out on her toxic behavior is too much confrontation for Latinxie to handle. She runs into the stall. She is specifically stated to not take a shit. So much for having anything interesting in this book.
Sorry, Patrick.
And she sees a bunch of shapes in the floor tiles. This part kind of sticks with me because what she sees is a cartoony T-Rex, a volcano, and a broken fan belt. Symbolically, it means her emotions went from absurdity to anger, then to brokenness. Credit where credit is due, this is actually a decently written paragraph. Granted, the reason for it existing is stupid and nonsensical, but at the very least, it shows effort in the single moment where Cora is having a panic attack. If the rest of the story was well done like this single moment, I would have given the book more of a pass, but this moment is a rarity. It's like one of those times when there's so much shit piled upon other shit, that somewhere in the density there's like a diamond that's formed.
That is one big pile of shit.
The fan belt is also a running theme in this first chapter, pretty much acting as a symbol of something that's designed to function, but it just snaps from years of trauma and abuse, which easily relates to Cora's psyche. Moments like this are to be appreciated because it has the world and the character's perspective sort of meeting together at a certain point, and it gives meaning to the opening where Cora's car wouldn't start because of a fan belt, and connects her emotion to the fan belt name drop when she was talking about the broken seal being a time bomb. The stress between Cora, the government, and the world itself are all being related to this fan belt metaphor. I would love it if the fan belt thing was perhaps a more appropriate symbol that can become a running theme throughout the entire story. Max Payne was an amazing example of a similar running theme, in the form of these needles everywhere and the drug called V, which has so many symbolic things attached to it that it's practically a Silent Hill level of depth. I guess another good example for a postmodernist kind of story would be something like the spinning top in the movie Inception. The idea of it spinning endlessly in a cycle and never toppling over easily relates to the idea of being trapped in a dream, and the feeling that the cycle will never stop. Not to compare Lindsay's writing to these much better written stories, but as you can see, It's a decent attempt at sorta reaching some moments of well-received narratives. It gets a point from me, but there's no way in hell that kind of moment can carry the rest of the book. Especially because right after Cora has her mild mental breakdown for about 20 minutes, she leaves the bathroom and like 5 people are waiting to use it, since she was selfish enough to put a door stopper for a bathroom that has multiple stalls, and she wasn't even crying or making any noise according to the way it's written. I don't know if Lindsay has ever worked at a place that was an office building, but not even on lunch breaks do people crowd around a bathroom. And there's no reason to block off the bathroom because supposedly only her friends saw her go in there. I've worked at so many places where if the bathroom is occupied, people, including myself, just leave and go back later, unless we have violent diarrhea or have to take a piss so badly it makes our knees buckle. And you know the kind of piss I'm talking about. The kind that starts off slowly because you've been holding it for so long, and then after you can visibly see your stomach deflate. Cora rushes back to her work floor, and supposedly she skips lunch because she's no longer hungry. Lindsay. Come on. You know that's a fucking lie. Whatever happened to stress eating? Why can't we just have a moment where she tries to eat and throw it up? And speaking of, why wasn't she dry heaving into the sink? The part about her panic attack after the symbolism thing is literally just, her heart beats fast, her dad sucks, and her friend is not really a friend. Her entire panic attack could have just been a link to styrofoam plates or any other emo song. I think it would have been better if Cora was some kind of colorful haired eyeliner wearing emo chick because she already got the fat part going on for her. And just give her the Eugenia Cooney hair and wrist warmers with some oversized boy shirt that has a Jack Skellington on it. I mean, she later wears a Disneyland t-shirt for corn's sake. This entire thing is right fucking there, but Lindsay missed it because there's no way in heck she would relate herself into an emo chick and living in 2007. It's practically unrealistic at that point, and that might break the immersion and ruin the nostalgia of all this pseudo-minimalist drivel. So, Cora goes to one of the few computers with internet on her work floor. Because it was said that they didn't get internet on their computers, but this one magically has it all of a sudden. And she looks up her dad's website to see his latest article titled, "These Desperate Lives." Cora's instant reaction is, ew, this is so pretentious. And we're not told how this is pretentious or how this was even a bad thing. It seems it's pretentious because the article was written about his family, but it actually wasn't. See, in the article, Nils says he has 3 children, meaning Cora has 2 siblings who we haven't yet to know who they are, but he never says their names. All he says is that they go to school in California near the Ampersand event. The article is actually about his philosophical question of, can a secret really be stolen? That's a really damn good question to ask, especially when I live by the doctrine of, if 2 people know something, it's no longer a secret. This is when the book's theme is brought to attention. The entire reason this entire book was written, and everything it stands for. Truth is a human right, and humans deserve to know the truth according to who we've been told is the bad guy this entire time. Lindsay writes it so we are not supposed to like Nils, since we're supposed to sympathize with Cora and her abandonment. But, for some reason, Lindsay thought this was a good idea to have the villain of the first chapter tell us the theme of the story, and it's in a way where we can't actually disagree. Like, the only way we could disagree with it is if we wanted to disagree with the entire book, and follow some super authoritarian ideology about how the truth should be kept away from the safety of the public. You know, like to have some kind of big lie that some regime was spouting out and relying on to get their way. I forgot what the name of that regime was, but they had members with a very similar name to it. I think it started with a J, or maybe it was an N. Oh well. That's not important. What's important is that Cora stops reading this article about freedom of speech and right to the truth in order to look around and see a cat lady glance at her. This makes Cora wonder a bunch of things and feel like she's being suspicious because she thinks her dad doxed her even though he didn't. At this point, I think that Lindsay wrote one thing and then forgot she wrote that part before about Cora's interview where she talked about her being Nils' daughter. And because this panicking stuff is all over the place. For some reason, she's fine with the tech hacktivist knowing she's Nil's daughter because she said she was a while ago. And now she's freaking out over a random person staring at her because she thinks this person is reading the same thing she's reading. I understand we can get paranoid when we're doing something we're not supposed to, like watching porn in the public place and thinking people can see it in the reflection of your glasses or like in the window next to you. But this is nothing like that. This is just irrational paranoia that makes Korra really inconsistent. She heavily contradicts herself, and she's just being annoying at this point. And this is way more annoying than Clid was in Breach of Peace. This is like if Clid saw the dead child and was unfazed in the beginning, and then later she sees the same dead child and throws up in disgust and starts freaking out. Okay, where the fuck was all that emotion when we actually needed you, huh? What makes it worse is that all of this panicking was all a setup for another Fergie name drop. Korra is like, why God, why didn't I listen to that radio broadcast from NPR instead of listening to Fergalicious? And I'm here like, wow, even Lindsay's characters know that was terrible writing. While page 9 had a single paragraph of good writing, everything that follows it just keeps on going downhill. And when I say downhill, I mean this was a tiny bump upwards that sends us straight down into fucking China. This is the part of the story that everyone starts tuning out, and if they already didn't, they are ready to slam the book shut and call it quits. Which is crazy to say when the only good paragraph is in the same scene. Page 11 and page 12. The article continues to have Nils say that he hopes to return to his family and his country, for the US government to remove him as a threat, and concludes with an offer for people to join him in his quest for the truth. The part that says, "Take up arms and join me," is both ominous and warming, which I actually do enjoy seeing. It makes Nils appear like a cult leader who is trying to love bomb his followers and his family, in hopes people see his sinister agenda as an innocent desire for something virtuous. This kind of article shows a bit of promise, but I can't help to say that this is ridiculously cryptic. It seems to be one of those moments where the writer knows what they wanted as an event and emotion, but didn't know how to convey it. The reader is supposed to see this kind of moment as creepy and deceiving, but because of the minimalist way Lindsay wrote anything related to this part, we are only to assume Korra is mad at her dad because he simply exists, or she thinks he doxed her, which he didn't. Korra has another panic attack after reading this, and now we are starting to have purple prose mixed in with this minimalist style, which totally conflicts with the tone, aesthetic, and purpose. Sometimes I don't know if this third-person limited story is meant to be first-person, because all we get from the narration is whatever Korra is thinking or feeling, and it's almost always written in a way that makes it seem the narrator is the one who's feeling it, or thinking these things. I read up to chapter 9, and I had other people tell me what happens up to around chapter 17, and in what I know from about half the book, there's never a moment where we leave Korra as a character to see something else. The book could have easily been written in first person. It should have been written in first person, and it would have benefited from such a decision because of how this entire story is only about Korra and her feelings. I think there's a later part where we follow a different character, but so far in this first chapter we're given a style that's meant for first person with such a focus on only one character's feelings at a very personal level, and there's nothing telling us why we should see this as anything other than first person. What follows after is a very fast but important to the story event, which is written in a very blunt and haphazard way. A shockwave destroys the glass of the building and people panic as they duck for cover. There's a white vapor trail that travels over the highway towards north, as if it's heading towards Pasadena, which is a very clear nod towards the previous ampersand event for anyone who bothered to pay attention. And when I say anyone who bothered to pay attention, I mean Lindsay literally writes into this dramatic situation in the same direction as the ampersand event. As a scene, there's nothing wrong with this moment. I actually like the idea of Korra finally sort of being in danger, and we sort of have our first alien encounter. However, the fact that Lindsay still doesn't know what she wants to make of these unidentified flying objects actually be yet, makes this moment feel like nothing happened. The reader needs to be told that it's not a meteor, and it's a fucking alien ship, or pod or whatever, crashing into California. We should have a moment where we see the wreckage and perhaps there should be a unique indicator that it's not a normal meteor, like, I don't know, a strange color of smoke or perhaps a unique sound. Instead, we have a white light, a vapor trail, compared to that which is caused by a 747, and a really poorly written dialogue tag where a woman shrieks a question, but this could have easily been better written by simply adding an exclamation point behind the question mark. But, you know, that 385-page goal isn't going to reach itself if the story actually tries to be minimalist, like how all the defenders say it is. My main issue with this scene is that the tone is completely absent, and I can only describe this kind of writing as meant for a screenplay. Writing for a film is much more different than writing for a novel, mostly in the form of really short sentences and paragraphs for the script, while a novel tends to be more detailed and elaborated. A good way to look at it is that a script has about 3 sentences for details in a paragraph, while a novel tends to have 5, like, as an average. But at the same time, it's like if Lindsay tried to stretch out these sentences into details that didn't matter to the event, but allow the visualization in an unappealing way that's absent of any emotion. Sure, some people scream and fall, but that doesn't give me an emotion about it. It's all actions with no reactions. It's all descriptions with no attachment. With the way it was written, it might as well have been copy and pasted from random segments of notes. And it's a dirty shame because this is perhaps the only moment that could have saved the first chapter from being completely useless. This is the part that reinforces the reader's decision on whether or not they care to continue. And it's appropriately right at the end of the first chapter. Out of all the vague promises in the first chapter, this is the only one that gets any actual substance attached to it, so we can believe the plot exists. And it's treated no differently than if Korra left her desk to go grab a cup of coffee. There's as much tension and energy in this event as there is between 2 snails falling asleep in the middle of having sex, which is appropriate since snail sex is way more ridiculously complicated than it should be. I swear, I had to read this part about 5 times just to know what's going on, because of the way that's worded, and because of the way whatever she's talking about is flying all over the place. For a part that will make it or break it for a lot of people previewing the story, this is the part that breaks it. What follows is perhaps one of the most useless additions to a scene that's already felt useless. I don't know how she did it, but she literally added filler to her filler. What we get is a blog post from Ellie, who wrote it the same day the new flying object passed them by. It's great to realize that we didn't get his reaction to the event during the scene because Korra wanted to run away so that she could read her dad's blog post, which made her think that he doxed her when he didn't. The blog ends with "Truth is a human right," which is where we get to the blurb tagline, which is supposed to be a meme Nils Ortega started. That's okay, but the rest of the blog post is a pair of scissors that snaps the fan belt, as they say. And I know what I'm about to say is really confusing, but his blog post makes the story timeline really convoluted. I had to read the blog post that's tacked on to the first chapter really carefully just to understand what's going on. What happened is that Lindsay made it seem like the ampersand event, the first meteor, was caused by the Friedma memo, as in the aliens who landed during the ampersand event were the aliens discussed in the memo. This is wrong. What happened, and what is explained indirectly, is that the Friedma memo was written before the ampersand event even occurred, but it was released a day after the ampersand event, with the Freedom Memo coming out in August 2007, meaning the ampersand and the obelisk events are separated by a month. So, to clarify, there was a previous alien encounter about 40 years before 2007, probably like in the 60s, where the government captured some aliens and tried to communicate but failed. Later, in March of 2007, we have someone write the Freedom Memo. August 2007, we have the ampersand land. And then now in September 2007, we get the obelisk event. I know I am jumping around a lot, but this confusion gets worse when we meet the alien called ampersand later on, about chapter 6 or something like that, and we're supposed to pay attention and understand that he's from the meteor in August, not the one that just landed. If this sounds like it's hard to follow, that's because it is, and I'm freaking simplifying it. This isn't Lindsay having a galaxy brain and being smarter than you. This is her writing a concluded chain of events on purpose, and then telling us indirectly what went on, so that in order to understand any of this, you might as well have that wall covered in red conspiracy strings to simply track it. I don't know about anyone else, but there's two things I refuse to do. Use a condom, and depend on notes to keep track of important details to understand the plot. If a book makes me have to do either one, that's a terrible book. And this is the first chapter, for corn's sakes. Trust me when I say, this is one of the better chapters of the book. If that makes your butthole pucker up in dread, we both know what's going on. Remember, this was published by a US branch of one of the big 5 publishers, St. Martin's Press. This was nominated for a Hugo Award. This was put on the New York Times bestsellers list. This is a book that Lindsay loves to humble brag about, and its entire first chapter leaves people scratching their heads instead of catching their breath. Let's summarize this alien turd, shall we? Summary. Due to this being a novel where the plot is absent throughout the first chapter and afterwards, I can't actually summarize much other than say the first chapter is all exposition. I assume Lindsay is going for a 3-act structure with 8 sequences, since that's what she made a video about, and she even talked about tension in this video.
All of these act points are there, even the twist in the third act, but these points are so buried in plot clutter that it feels a lot more muddied and random than it actually is.
Yet throughout the entire first chapter, no tension is to be seen. That means anything to the reader. Because the reader doesn't feel tension from confusion, they feel confusion. In the video, she also talks about how the first sequence is the inciting incident, which is caused by the point of attack. Usually the point of attack is dealt with in the prologue or the background, and in things like modernist storytelling, it's not even really a thing, rather it's a point of interest. Point of attack is actually a terrible way to cause the inciting incident because this tends to cause a protagonist to become a passive protagonist, which Cora most certainly is, and she stays that way throughout the entire story. Passive protagonist isn't necessarily a bad thing, but if we're going to follow the character through what we expect to be a hero's journey, or have Cora be a main focus point of the entire novel, then her being passive is a terrible and uninteresting way to tell the story. Passive works well in something like a Lovecraftian horror, or like in The Great Gatsby, where the protagonist is experiencing all these events as one who records them, meaning they tend to be the victims or narrator of the entire ordeal. Cora is neither, because she is supposed to be the self-insert who tames the beast through her Beauty and the Beast allegory, and she doesn't even do that by the end of the book. The flying object being seen could be considered as a point of attack, but even then, it's not considered out of the ordinary yet, and is treated like another day at work. I can't even say there was an inciting incident yet, because nothing happened. Cora hasn't done anything yet. All of this first chapter has been exposition and filler. With filler in the filler. We get to know the setting and the characters, sure, but at what cost? All of this could have been explained while the plot is engaged. Yet the plot is over in Pasadena, and we're trapped in shitty LA. The least I can say is that this first chapter appropriately portrays the rest of the story, and how everything plays out and how it's written. Things begin with nothing happening. We are then treated to a sort of decent moment because it's written with some emotion, probably on the days Lindsay was sober enough to take an editor's consideration, and then it ends with a light fizzle that just makes things more convoluted. Instead of making sure we pay attention and are intrigued by the scene, we are prayed to like we are the goddess of the harvest herself. Please, reader, please, I beg of thee, pay attention to this drivel that I'm writing, and you might be given a goat as a sacrifice. Even if I was a blue-balled Muslim, I would not accept that goat. Speaking of blue balls and being lied to, this entire opening gives us nothing that we are promised from the blurb, outside of a meme about truth being a human right, and a bunch of stuff that's in name only. We meet the government while they're chasing Cora down the highway, but everyone's falling asleep while doing it and nothing happens. We get a conspiracy theorist and hacktivist talking about aliens, but nobody actually says anything and they are all interrupted before anything is actually said. We're told that Cora is super famous for being the daughter of Nils Nazi Jones Ortega, but then we're treated to her boring day job where nobody knows who she is. As you can see, we are being delivered what's on the label, but it's not in a way that's interesting or even worth reading for the average reader. We are getting things that are barely passing as on subject and not quite lies. It's no different than those movie descriptions on crappy straight-to-DVD films that say things like action fueled. And then the movie has like one fight scene that lasts a minute or two and everyone has their wigs fall off. Like when someone measures their dick and starts from the butthole, this book overstates what it's actually packing. And this is a dirty shame because there's so much anyone could do with this concept. Alien romance inspired by Transformers and Invader Zim? How could this go so wrong so fast? How is it even legal that this book is so boring? What possessed Lindsay to decide this book would be devoid of humor when she's known for her humor? I understand people like Jim Carrey trying to go outside of their routine and trying out something like The Number 23 or like when Vince Vaughn was Norman Bates, but come on, we all know this doesn't end well. Lindsay tried to go for some kind of slice of life story disguised as a political thriller while calling it a sci-fi romance, and she failed on all accounts. And if you thought the first chapter was confusing, you should check out the appraisal she has in the book from journalists. Suspenseful and inventive. Also funny and full of action, Axiom End remixes Hollywood's alien invasion playbook. The only suspense I felt was when the funny in action was going to appear. I don't think this person read the book. I think they had Lindsay tell them what's in the book and Lindsay was huffing humorously at her own idea. Axiom End is the most relatable sci-fi novel in years. Bitch, what? Axiom End. If you enjoy first contact tales, alien cultures, inexplicable found families, beautiful chaos, and elegantly constructed stories. None of this is in the book. The first contact is a throwaway in the prologue. Inexplicable found families is just a fancy way of saying, I don't know what's going on. Elegantly constructed story. What is elegant about a plot being delivered to you through numerous word salads? I've seen breast implants from the 1800s that look less fake than these appraisals. To end the madness, let's go over what I thought about the story so far, and let's give it an arbitrary rating that won't make any sense later on once I start reviewing more things. Plot. Since nothing happened, I can't give it a plot, but I can say that at least it's a vague promise that something might happen later. I'm rather neutral on this one because it's too soon to say, but from when I read up to halfway, the plot is a huge mess that forgets what it's trying to do until practically the end of the story. This book is haunted because the plot phases in and out and doesn't do much but dim the light sometimes. Setting. Not gonna lie, I like the setting of LA in 2007, but I really hate how this book doesn't do any details other than pointless name drops. We go from Cora's house to the highway to her job in one chapter, and I cannot imagine any of it. There's zero imagery to be found, and the only kind that we do get is in the form of Cora's hair color and the cracks on the bathroom floor. Not a very good first impression if you ask me. Care actors. I wish this book had some dead bodies for me to enjoy and use as a scapegoat for liking the character, but there are none, and that's a shame. The best I can do is say that I like the extra side character Ellie, because we never see him again, and I like that about him. As for Cora, she is portrayed as a female equivalent of Filbert from Rocko's Modern Life, always being nauseous and having panic attacks. Like that, but if you also added a lot of bitch into her bowl of cereal for breakfast, because her attitude is very entitled, and at the same time very paranoid. I feel Lindsay wanted Cora to be flawed in the beginning to later fix those flaws, but spoilers, she only gets more flawed and more annoying as her paranoia turns to PTSD, which isn't actually PTSD in a realistic meaning of the term. Dialogue. To determine if dialogue is good, it's always fun to see if a scene would change at all if the dialogue was removed. Looking back, if we removed all the dialogue from the first chapter and made it a silent film that has no subtitles, it would have been a way better first chapter. This is my indirect way of telling you that the dialogue sucked donkey dick through a straw. Theme. Surprisingly, the theme is well planned when it comes to the Beauty and Beast motif, and I would say that the theme is the only thing that's carrying the story at all. Granted, it's not quite there in the first chapter, and there's a massive lack of symbolism to keep it consistent, but we have a couple of moments where the theme is considered, and we have the meme of the truth is a human right constantly being repeated, so that is a plus. The theme alone cannot make up for the story when everything else is bad, but it can make a bad story look less terrible. This is not one of those stories, because the theme gets worse as more topics pop up later on, but if we didn't know that, then we might as well have given it a pass. Tone. If it's not dry, it's high. When I say high, I mean it's under the influence of marijuana. The tone conflicts with what's being said nearly every time something happens, except for the one scene where Cora is freaking out in the bathroom. One paragraph out of so many is an outlier, not the rule, so I can't even count it because it was obviously done by accident. Meanwhile, everything else being delivered as tepid as a $5 handy as an old folks home has got to be intentional, just like the lack of humor. Overall, I understand we're only about 3% into the story, but the first chapter is the first impression, and it's supposed to be the best foot forward, especially from a media analyst who has been at it for 10 years and went to college for it. Even if I was to say this is her first novel, and she deserves a pass, there's no reason to give her one, because this isn't her first novel, and she has everyone and their mama helping to make this first chapter something worthy of being read. If I had to choose a scale from 1 to 10, I would have given this opening chapter a 1.1. The only reason I'm not giving it a 1 by itself is because there are some promising things about it, but I'm not going to give it a 2, because there's zero reason for me to read past the first chapter outside of pure curiosity as to how it was written and published in the first place. Reading this book makes me feel like I'm an alien from another planet, and I discovered some strange thing that I've never seen before, and I don't know what the fuck to make of it. So, I hope you enjoyed my anal probing of this book. And yes, I waited the entire time to make that pun. As much as I want there to be a next time with this particular book, I'm not sure if I can go into that much detail as I did with this one. And honestly, they are going to be the same mistakes over and over again. It's Lindsay we're talking about. So, next episode about this book will be more like a read-along than a full-blown analysis. But I'll still call it one because if Lindsay can call her books sci-fi, I can call my videos whatever the fuck I want. I'm thinking of plowing through like 5 chapters or maybe like 12, and turn every chapter into a point instead of every page, which will dramatically reduce how much I would be covering, but I might miss a lot of details that are important to learn about, but we shall see. Well, we shall see. Till next time.